Hello, I'm David, and I don't have anyone to talk to, so I'm going to share my thoughts with you. When I was younger, life seemed simple and easy. Not many responsibilities, and into early adulthood, my goals were fairly simple and basic. Survive, find food and shelter, water, and breathe. At least the breathing the air part was free. There is nowhere really in life to go except for forward and up. Now older in life, I feel weighed down by kind of endless responsibilities and paying bills and taxes, and not really having any kind of significant time or much time at all for relaxation or enjoyment. And lately, watching the finance news, it appears like the Federal Reserve might finally be cutting interest rates, which they had been talking about, really, since the end of 2023 and into 2024. But they kept holding off on it because inflation and prices and employment or whatever did not appear to be stable. Now finally they're talking about everything stabilizing and now potentially cutting interest rates here starting in September. What is the Federal Reserve? It's essentially a hybrid public-private central bank of the United States that was established in the early 1900s, 1913, after really the panic or crisis of 1907, when Congress delegated or abdicated its power over money and the monetary policy to the new entity of the Federal Reserve. They are essentially the wizards behind the curtain. Yet, ironically, the Federal Reserve was created to stabilize our financial system. Yet, since inception, we've witnessed repeat cycles of booms and bust, where the haves often boom and the have-nots are typically the ones to bust. And we can point to things like the Great Depression. In 29, following the creation of the Federal Reserve, this particular economic catastrophe wasn't just a downturn, it was almost a complete failure of the system that was created to prevent such a thing, instability. And the Fed's policies, including tightening the money supply at the wrong time, arguably exacerbated the crisis, leading to widespread unemployment and economic hardship. This historical event underscores the limitations of centralized monetary control and unintended consequences of policy decisions. Creating a financial institution to stabilize the economy and then having an event fairly shortly after, less than a couple of decades, like the Great Depression, is just kind of awe-inspiring, really. Or later on, we can fast forward to the late 20th century. We saw the dot-com bubble burst of the early public internet era. The Federal Reserve's low interest rates in the late 90s fueling speculative investment in technology stocks really before technology had kind of permeated society. Very early Yahoo or eBay type of online.com stuff, which led to an overinflation of the market that eventually crashed spectacularly. This cycle of boom and bust, facilitated by monetary policy, shows how the Fed and its actions can lead to economic distortions, benefiting those who can exit investments at the peak while leaving many others to bear big losses in the short term. And we've had other examples over the past 110 years now where the Federal Reserve has failed in their dual mandate to provide maximum employment and also stable pricing. For example, stagflation of the 1970s, which was then pretty quickly followed by the recession of the 80s, the early and mid 80s, and sort of the lending and loan crisis of that time period. And then past the dot-com bubble, we lead into the really global financial crisis of 2008 and the late 2000s. It's hard to find much stability from our current financial overlords' processes and operations at the Federal Reserve. And it sort of turned the idea and concept of saving money into a more complex issue, at least for the common person. Saving money isn't really saving money. If you take your money and put it into a savings account or physically hold your money and save it somewhere, it's just devalued over time. Inflation, CPI, these things erode the value of money, and your money isn't tied to anything anymore. The 1970s and Nixon made sure to decouple our U.S. dollar from any sort of backing by a hard asset, which at the time was gold. And if you look at gold over time, you can kind of buy the same thing with gold. The same physical amount now will buy essentially the same thing it would have bought 10, 20, 50, 100 years ago, the same amount of gold. And depending on the cycle, sometimes you might be a little bit better or a little bit worse, but plus or minus, gold buys the same thing. So since the 70s, we've decoupled our dollar from a hard, stable asset that holds value, and now we just have fiat currency provided by the Federal Reserve, and then they get to set monetary policy and decide if the value of our money goes up or down. And typically over the past 100 years, it just steadily declines in value because we make more money. We increase the supply of money, and thereby the value of money goes down. They use terms to kind of describe these things like fancy sounding terms, academic sounding terms like quantitative easing and quantitative tightening, which essentially just means increasing or decreasing the money supply. That's all it means. They print more money or destroy money. And you can actually go to the Federal Reserve's website and, look at their reports. And they talk about how much money they pump into the economy and how much money they pump out. Or we print, hundreds of millions of dollars and send that money as foreign aid to other countries. And, somebody has to pay for that in a real way. We have to pay for it, whether we know it or not. It's, dollars don't physically fall out of your pocket or your bank account. The sheer reality of new supply existing causes your money, the value of your money, to go down. And for any of these social services or foreign aid or whatever, the population at large ends up paying through taxation and the inflation of the cost of goods and services. It all just goes up. And you can look at things like the U.S. national debt clock, where we've got trillions and trillions of dollars of debt, which at this point, it's hard to believe we can even pay the interest on all of the debt that we have accrued as a people and a nation. So, quantitative tightening and easing, which just means printing or destroying money, which has been happening at sort of an increased rate ever since the pandemic happened, to fix the economy or stabilize or whatever the Fed wants to call it. They either increase or decrease the supply of money because really we're all just in a Keynesian economic system, right? Instead of something like Austrian, where you have the concept of the bull and the bear spirit, and to keep an economy going, you really just spend money, or that is modern, if you can call it that, modern monetary policy to facilitate and stimulate an economy. You want people spending money, buying things, which, if you look at consumer spending now, it is actually fairly high, which is unbelievable, at least to me, because it doesn't look like people really have a lot of money. They have a lot of debt. They purchase and spend things and keep the economy flowing by really just spending nothing to buy things they don't need. So it's, kind of exacerbated in today's digital age. You don't even, with fiat currency, all the money's fake, right? You don't have a physical tie-in to gold or silver or some kind of hard asset. It doesn't necessarily need to be gold or silver, but historically throughout time it has been. And, you look at things like Rome or whatever, when they decoupled their money, debased their money and started adding cheap metals or, whatever, the economy eventually just all kind of falls apart. And I've been amazed. Ours has gone on this long, which we were decoupled really in the 70s. And so now it's been 50 plus years or so. So I don't know how long we can go on, but it seems to go worse and worse. But anyway, this kind of decoupling of money from a hard asset is, bad in and of itself, it seems like. but it's kind of exacerbated today because in the digital age, you don't even have to print more fiat currency. It's just a digit somewhere in a computer or a financial system. And then if you look into like wiring money, we still use all of these old archaic systems like cards, credit cards, debit cards, really magnetic strip cards, which just transmit a string of digits or whatever your account number. Or wiring money between bank to bank is really still a fairly archaic way to do it. It's really not been until we kind of fast forward to cryptocurrencies, blockchain, the idea of a distributed digital ledger that is validated and verified by all of the other users using the system, that we see kind of an advancement in at least a system of exchange somehow. Trading, digital trading, and keeping a ledger of that. We kind of have an advancement in banking. We've been using kind of the same banking systems for decades and decades now, over half a century, and we just keep using them. So, anyway, I work in technology, where initially, during the pandemic, it kind of spurred this surge in the usage of online tools and working from home. Saw a boost in demand for collaboration software, video chat, software as a service in general became a bigger buzzword and much more known thing. And however, now we're kind of on the back end of that initial surge and rise, where now we see more of a bust from the boom. More and more big tech companies, Google, Microsoft, Dell, have been and are laying off hundreds or thousands of people every week or every month. More and more employees are laid off. And kind of strangely, we still see consumer spending remain at all-time highs or fairly high, which continues to prop up our GDP, which is kind of a funny thing. Looking in the news recently, they've kind of revised their numbers on both unemployment and GDP, and kind of the job loss numbers in the past month or so has just been kind of awe-inspiring over especially what they originally seemed to kind of imply, that the economy's good, employment's good, and then, oh, by the way, we've lost about 1 million people, or close to 1 million people from the workforce. Then you kind of have to think in general, right? The numbers are kind of propped up in terms of really how stable unemployment or employment really is, if you actually factor in how much of that employment is full-time or people taking on multiple jobs or whatever in the system. I've noticed, at least personally in my work environment, the cost of everything from vendors has just been increasing year over year, 10%, 20%, and it's each year 10 or 20%. And any kind of technical account managers that I've dealt with over the past 4 or 5 years have all kind of been laid off or replaced, and sometimes they're not replaced at all. I've had some of them, send me kind of desperate emails asking me if I have any kind of work leads or if I can help them with employment. So there's just kind of this big bust and then panic and desperation in the market, in the workplace in general. And I've kind of noticed this not only recently, but kind of throughout my life, is there's been this kind of visible decay in American society. Businesses, more often these days, are locking their goods up behind cabinets and cases, and you have to get someone to unlock cheap product sometimes. Big increases in crime and social isolation in general kind of permeating society these days, and lots of disparity in income and sort of a ongoing acceleration in polarization of political parties, gender, society, asset classes, just an acceleration of everything in terms of kind of cracking or disparity in society as a whole. And meanwhile, the whole time, at least the mainstream media seems to portray life as if everything is going pretty well. We're on an upswing. Life is wonderful. But it's hard to buy any of that, especially it's hard to buy any of the Federal Reserve stuff anymore. Here they are talking about cutting inflation, which, what is that really going to do? Is it going to stabilize the economy? Is it going to stay stable, or is it just going to accelerate unemployment? Typically, the pattern usually is the Fed cuts interest rates and then unemployment kind of spikes even worse than it already was. So, what are we going to see here? And we're kind of on the precipice, all of these things converging in an election year, as it usually does. You have all of this stuff kind of swirling around in September, October, November, while everyone kind of holds their breath and waits for how's everything going to play out and what's going to happen in the long term, which we probably won't have a good idea of until at least the election takes place. Which direction are we really going to commit to? And then we're going to have some kind of fallout regardless. Whoever wins, then we kind of are thrown into a new basket of problems of waiting until the shift of power takes place, at least in America in January, and then seeing how the new leadership's policies and positions actually start to play out in reality. So I kind of wonder, are we on the brink of an economic or debt crisis? But a lot of the time it just feels like I'm sitting around waiting for something to happen, waiting for elections to happen, waiting to understand future directions of the leadership, waiting for economic stability, or waiting for somebody to admit we're actually in a recession right now. It's sort of a strange feeling of time both passing fast and slow simultaneously. The past 5 or 6 years of my life has sort of slipped away in the blink of an eye, almost unnoticed. And yet, my individual days, especially holidays, kind of drag on endlessly. Sitting here on a holiday Monday, waiting for my life to loop back into the typical work cycle for another work week of essentially nothing. This system of the Federal Reserve, economic booms and busts, it's all sort of largely unavoidable. And our cost of living is inflated, whether we like it or not, and whether we plan for it or not, our purchasing power is kind of eroded away. And we're all dependent on debt, monetary tools, to try and make it through our lives. Debt for things we need, and then oftentimes things we just want. For a long time, I tried to avoid debt entirely, completely. But in the current system, it's very difficult to avoid debt and be able to purchase things like homes or cars. And you really just have to come to the reality and realization that, you have to learn how to manage debt well. It's a necessity, really, for modern life in our particular economic system. You have to manage debt, whether you like it or not. You have to build a credit score and then be able to leverage other people's money through lending to be able to purchase things, borrow more and purchase things through the leveraging of debt. And kind of the concept of ownership over time has ownership and purchasing things really has kind of morphed more into just lifelong renting and borrowing for most people, just over the course of your life. And it's kind of been exacerbated more lately. I hear more in the news now, they talk about expanding home loans from 30-year mortgages to 40 or 45-year mortgages. And I see often now people taking on longer-term car loans for vehicles that cost more and more. It's kind of amazing to see trucks that have turned into luxury vehicles, essentially, that cost $60,000, $80,000, $100,000, and then people taking out loans that are 7 or 8 years to purchase an asset that just depreciates. And now a truck can cost more than a small starter home used to historically cost. So And just the very idea of, purchasing something, if you can even call it that at this point, a large asset like a car or a home, and leveraging debt to do it, really, over the course of that loan means spending multiple times what the actual cost of that asset is. If you buy a house for, if you can find one anymore, for $200,000 or $300,000 over the lifetime of a 30-year mortgage, you're really paying hundreds of thousands of dollars more for that asset. Because the reality is most people aren't going to make extra payments or pay more every month to pay that asset off quickly. They'll take decades or longer and pay double or triple for a home. And that's just kind of what our economic policy and the Federal Reserve System has done to us over the course of the last 100 years. It's turned us all into kind of debt slaves in a very stealthy, insidious kind of a manner where most people don't recognize it day to day, or they're just acclimated to the concept of leveraging debt to pay for everything over time and pay more for everything over time rather than be able to afford to purchase things outright or in full over a shorter period of time. And really anymore, wages don't keep up with inflation, and where is there to work really in America these days? So, sort of my cynical view on modern monetary policy and the Federal Reserve and the direction of everything financially right now. But that seems to be the case. People would rather have the instant gratification of having everything right now and having everything be turnkey right now. Newer with a bunch of amenities and features, and instantly have the thing and then endlessly rent and try to pay it off, rather than live like a Spartan in the short term and save up and try and buy something outright in full, which I understand it is very difficult to save for anything and own it and purchase it outright. So what happens next in the immediate future? Does the economy actually stabilize? Is the Federal Reserve going to be able to maintain their dual mandate of maximum employment and price stability? Or do we finally fall into what the powers that be will openly admit is a recession? And will it be something similar to the global financial crisis of 2008, or will it be even worse than that? That's what I'm wondering and thinking about today. That's all I've got. Have a good day.